everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. We are in the afternoon, but you may be seeing this in the morning. The podcast we're going to talk about today is linked to the 5 ways to wellbeing plan that we're going to Sport and Active Life are going to do during Leicester. During February. And it's primarily about taking on committee roles. You know, all students within the university can take on committee roles as long as you're a member of a club. And we have here today one of our alumni, Sam Cranswick, who I've asked along today to give us an insight into his experience or student journey while at Leicester. And he was instrumental in developing one of the many Team Leicester clubs. And we're going to go through a sort of quick chat, about 20 minutes, 25 minutes with Sam today. And hopefully this may make you think about becoming a Team Leicester member, or, you know, we'll answer some of your questions of what's happening. So as I said, I'd like to introduce Sam Cranswick. And Sam, it'd be great for you to give the students at Leicester to, introduce yourself, really.
Cool. Yeah, cheers, Steve. Thank you. So, yeah, Steve said, my name's Sam Cranswick. I graduated in July 2018, which is already coming up, well, feels a long time ago already. It's likely been nearly 2.5, 3 years. I was part of the men's rugby union team for my whole 3 years at Leicester, so from 2015 through 18. Doing a number of roles, playing a number of teams, having a great time doing so. I studied law for my degree, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Although be it not working in law now, I work at Vodafone. So yeah, all about the connections and whatnot. My current role is currently in partner management, looking after our global partner management team, especially looking at kind of elements within kind of projects and things we're doing with the likes of Apple, Microsoft, Google. So very different to what I studied, but yeah, quite a poignant and relevant area to be working at the moment, especially I think being online. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
That's great, Sam. So you talk about you were part of the men's rugby union committee, and I'm guessing some of the things that you learned, which we'll go into during this podcast, help you, move with the job that you've currently got, and gaining that job in a way. But in line with the committee, when did you start thinking about becoming a committee member?
Yeah, so I mean, I was involved with the club from early days, so playing regularly in in all 3 teams, first, seconds, and thirds. And I kind of immediately thought that I had a really good group of friends in the club, really great team, great club to be part of. I thought I wanted to make sure that I could be a part of that, help kind of drive the direction, help drive the leadership in some ways of what we were doing. Now, for me, that was coming to about this sort of time in my first year. So coming to committee elections, where I posed the thought of becoming quite, I suppose, out there being club captain. So I had ideas how I could lead the team, how I could lead the club, but also make sure that everything was happening in the way that could develop. So be that on pitch with playing, but also off pitch with things such as the administration side of kind of the financing, of organising the coaching, even as having a really solid committee and having that leadership position for the whole thing in the club. I was really fortunate that I was then elected into the club captain position in my first year, and was then able to kind of take that forward in my second and third years of university.
So you talk quite a bit about leadership, and was that the main key factor, motivational factor that influenced you to become a committee member, or were there others?
Yeah, I think leadership was a big one, because I think it's the idea of actually being able to kind of lead as you want others to kind of follow in some ways. So instead of kind of thinking, okay, things can change, but just kind of thinking, oh, well, we can make noise and whatever, actually showing how we can implement that change was a big thing. I think that was a key factor. I think another one was the idea of then giving back. So actually, how can I leave the club in a better place when I graduate than when I got into the club? Now, that's not saying the club was in a bad place at all. Actually, we were in a really strong place on the pitch. We were super successful, and as far as I believe, we've still been very successful since I've graduated. But it was actually thinking, how can I kind of leave that in a better place? I mean, it goes back to a book I've read previously called Legacy. I don't know if you've read it before, by James Kerr, and it talks about the All Blacks. So again, poignant rugby example, but it's the idea that if you kind of get your shirt, you play your game, you take off the shirt, you leave the shirt in a better place than when you got it. So either you play to a higher level or you do kind of better things. And for me, that was what I really wanted to do, and the way I saw the committee positions when I chose to apply.
That's great. So you do talk about why you applied, but for our future students, things have slightly changed with COVID. Everything's in a different position. So could you just give us some thoughts on what you think are the key characteristics that students need to have to fulfill a committee role with any Team Leicester club? We're not talking specifically the club you had. There's 33 Team Leicester clubs that people can choose and can join. Are there any key characteristics you think?
I think one of them that's definite is commitment. So it's not that you're signing up for a role which is just to have a good time. I mean, to be honest, we had some really good times when I was kind of captain and president of the club, which was off the back of the fact that we had a really committed committee, that people wanted to put the time in, wanted to just do that +1. It wasn't a case of you just train and that's it, or you just kind of put a few posts on Facebook and that's it. There was real organisation and management behind the scenes that then led to that success. So I think one of them is having commitment. I think, and this goes really, especially for those who are probably in their first year looking to apply, is confidence, is the fact that actually, yes, if you became club captain or you became even kind of treasurer, etc., within the club, you've got to have the confidence that there will be people probably older and more experienced than you within the club setting that perhaps you'll be in some ways responsible for their club. And for a lot of people, the club will mean a lot to the individuals. So having that confidence that, okay, yeah, I can do this role. I want to put myself forward for this role. And if you get it, it's almost that reciprocal confidence that people believe in you to do that. So people might doubt themselves, oh, can I do this? Is it am I good enough, etc. But you can be, because you have that confidence to push yourself. And I think that links a lot to the idea of ambition. If you're ambitious, think I've got big ideas, there's something that doesn't kind of look right, feel right, I think could even be better than it is today. I think pushing that within a committee role is the perfect space to do it, because you're at the forefront of the club. That being said, even if you're not on the committee and you've got big ideas and you've got that confidence, there's nothing stopping you kind of still being a leading member of really kind of influencing that direction and that decision making.
Having worked with you, as the support staff, for men's rugby in a way, I just wonder what you think about, this is something we had to do on a regular basis, communication, and also, we refer back to the leadership, but where do you think it stands on having that credibility? So, for instance, if you want to do a certain role, so for instance, a treasurer, that you have the, you can demonstrate you've got the credibility of understanding that role, having those skills that are needed. Where'd you come from there?
It's an interesting one. I think if you have already fully qualified for the job, it's probably not the right job for you, if that makes sense. So I think there's always got to be an element of growth. So if you're doing something, it's a case, what can I bring to a role, but then what can I get back from the role as well? It's all about kind of the idea of kind of growing into positions. That might be actually, you think I'm perfectly capable of completing said role on the committee. You think, yeah, I want to do it because I can do X, Y, Z. So let's take treasurer for your example, Steve. It might be that you're studying accounting and finance, and you really want to actually show your practical knowledge, also your theoretical knowledge in a practical setting. You may have studied, say, accounting and finance, but not actually be able to properly show it. So all of a sudden, the committee becomes your vehicle to show that, to become your example as to name a time when you delivered on a budget, for example. And actually, instead of saying, I know what a budget is, it's here's the proof, which is a great example. But it might actually be, if you are that same person wanting to go for the treasurer position, you might think, actually, I want to have an understanding, and I have an understanding in budgeting, but I'd be really useful or really impactful as a captain, as a club captain, because I've got an understanding of the treasurer's work. So I could speak to the treasurer about what they're doing. I could maybe even help them if they're wanting to learn more. But I might have a leadership ambition, or I might have a ambition to understand more about other areas of the club that I might not understand fully, and want to apply myself to try and kind of stretch myself and push myself for that role. So I think there's a balance that you might think, I'm fully qualified for a role, or it might be actually it's a push, but I know what I want to try and achieve, and build those skills and learn those skills to grow into that position. The idea of like a growth mindset, etc.
Yeah, and does it, in your experience now, of graduating into 18, does the growth demonstrate those skills well to, future employers? Is that something that you feel that is applicable?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the case of not being comfortable at all times. I think if you think, oh, I'm fully comfortable and I'm kind of flatlining and coasting through, you're not growing and pushing yourself and learning new skills. I mean, I suppose if I thought at 18 or 21 that I knew all I needed to know and I was doing all I needed to do, I would be 60 doing the exact same thing, having not really grown or changed or done much more. Whereas actually thinking, if every single kind of job or experience or interaction I can both give something to someone or give something to a role, but then get something back and become a little bit better, doing that X number of hundreds, thousands of times, you'll grow massively. I think that's where I saw and gained a lot through my time on the committee when I was at Leicester.
Okay, that's really helpful. Well, and it's demonstrable because you've gone into quite a challenging work environment, where the skills you have learned basically are being transferred on a daily basis. So I'm referring to skills, and at the university now we talk about transferable skills, and this is something you probably would have, discussed with the careers department, looking to before you were graduating, and what transferable skills, is probably related a little bit to characteristics, do you think are key at the end of the day, for these roles?
I think it almost goes back to the point I made with regards to if you're studying accounting and someone asks
Yeah.
you, well, have you ever done accounting? And you're like, well, no, I've studied it. That's a far different answer to a case of, here's an example when I did. I remember in my interview for Vodafone, it almost got a little bit embarrassing during the interview because every single time they said, name a time when, it normally started with Leicester or rugby. So for me, it was everything kind of came back to the things which I'd managed to kind of experience and deliver whilst at Leicester. So, I mean, for example, it might be name a time when you dealt with senior stakeholders. And so for me in my current job, that's really important because I'll be dealing with people who have got 30 years more experience than me and they're paid a lot more than I am.
Yeah.
Now, in the university setting, if you're just, I suppose, in just playing in your team or you're part of the club, but you're not really having to engage with people within the university or people within different kind of teams or clubs, etc., or even with the SU, if you've not got that connection, it's hard to demonstrate how you've kind of dealt with or kind of worked, engaged with different stakeholders. Being on the committee, you have to all the time. You might be working with your other clubs to, I don't know, plan together an event, or it might be that you're working with the head of sports or the SU sport lead to then just talk about kind of performance of the club and that sort of thing. It completely changes what you're doing and actually takes your ability to look at examples and to talk about yourself in that way to another level. And that's what I saw the real differential when it came to looking for jobs and employability, is that if you've got an example for every question you get asked, it helps you 100 times over. And if you can find those examples through doing something you love through your sport and your club, for me, it's a win-win.
And what the key, well, like you say, the real differential is personally is being able to communicate those experiences at the end of the day. When you are sitting in front of an employer or even your members within your committee. But just to ask one more question in this area. So the committee or the two committees you oversaw as club captain 2 years running, what did you feel was the key like transferable skill that knitted that committee together, made them work together, or was there more than one? I don't know. It's
sorry, Steve.
no, go on. Is there more than one that you would feel our students today that are potentially going into this role would need to know about?
Yeah, I think probably in a COVID world as well, the biggest one is communication. Because one thing that I learned probably the hard way a couple of times was if you don't communicate what's in your head to the people who are working with you, you can't be working on the same page. Likewise, if you don't communicate expectations, it's very difficult to then think, well, let's say, for example, you asked somebody to do something, but you didn't make it clear how or when you wanted something done. it's very difficult to then say, well, where is it? Because there weren't kind of that communication, that strong communication in that way. I think that's a really solid one. But then I think there's also, on the flip side of communication, it's understanding, it's empathy, it's the ability to think, well, not everybody works in the same way, and also it's a thing to think, actually, especially within the committee roles, a lot of people are learning, a lot of people are probably doing things for the very first time if they've not had that kind of experience. It's understanding as to, well, how can we work together? It's not your problem, my problem, it's a collective problem. And I see that not just in the committee to permeate into the club, but as a committee, you are in some ways the flag bearers for a club, for a team. You are the ones who've got the opportunity and in some ways the power to really influence and change how things work. If, let's say, something's not, you might have really bad facilities for your team, and that's something which is everyone's training heart is not what we want. You've got the ability to have that conversation. It might not come with an outcome that you want, but it's still you've still got that ability to influence, and the ability to communicate properly, both internally and externally, I think is super, super important, and is a skill you can take outside of Leicester into the wider world as well.
That's good. That's really great. It answers my question at the end of the day. But basically everything morphs into teamwork. That's my belief at the end of the day, that communication. If you haven't got that, and if you can't communicate as a team, you're not going to be effective at the end of the day.
I think on that point as well, Steve, on teamwork, I think one thing that I remember through my time at Leicester, I think we had, top of my head, we had over 2,000 members in Team Leicester. I think, I could be wrong, we had 37 clubs, something like that. And I remember when we had our kind of regular kind of team club captain meetings, so the club captain from every team would come together, or every club, sorry, and we'd plan together, okay, how can we do events together? How can we maybe collaborate? So can we do, I suppose, like charity games together? How can we harness the sizes of our clubs to do kind of great stuff together? That doesn't mean it's kind of, I don't know, rugby versus netball or football versus hockey, whatever, in a sense of an internal competition. It's actually a case of how can we be one Team Leicester, so then actually we can achieve things as a whole. Because as a student body, I can't remember what the amount of students at Leicester were, but it was a significant percentage, maybe 15-20% were within Team Leicester. That's a massive part of the student body. It's how we can kind of really influence that group.
Yeah, and it's a great example of inclusion at the end of the day, when people are working together, for one goal or one outcome, rather than trying to fight it, like you say, try and fight each other for the same outcome. Upon reflection, you would, over time, you probably would have reflected on your committee roles. What did you feel went well, and what would you have done differently?
I think it almost links to kind of my advice with how to run, like not run the committee, but that teamwork side. So I think during my third year at uni, so when I was in my final year, I was fortunate to be the club president and then the first team captain for rugby. So to split that in half, you almost had a on-field responsibility to be the first team captain, and then an off-field responsibility to be the club president. And I think for me, a lot of what I leveraged in that club president role was based off the playing role, in the sense of actually really improving the standard of the first team, improving the way that kind of as a team as a whole, on the playing side, so training and etc. for the whole club was massively lifted. The bit that probably kind of fell a bit at the wayside was some of the off-field, you could say, kind of incidents or off-field management in some respect to how we kind of engaged with the different clubs. So it might be actually we became very much a case of men's rugby union, we want to just get to the top of our leagues, we want to get promoted, we want to win our varsity. I think perhaps we became very aligned to the performance basis, and then maybe kind of left some of the additional Team Leicester elements behind, potentially. Perhaps as well, and again, this is just trying to think about my time in the role, it was probably also a delegation piece on me. So I think probably having had that year as club captain, then moving into club president, not a hell of a lot changed within the role, but actually I was already versed. I'd gone through everything once. I'd done a whole varsity cycle. I'd done a whole kit ordering cycle. I'd done kind of lots of things which are fundamental to the year I'd done. So I thought, well, I just know it, so I'll just do it. And the problem I probably had was that I didn't invite the right people in. So let's say if it was the treasurer's role to sort out all the kit ordering and do all that communication, because I knew it was probably just quicker if I did the comms, because I already knew the person at Canterbury, from Canterbury at the time, knew the person at Canterbury, knew what we needed to do, knew what we needed to order. I just did it. And actually, probably what I didn't do was allow that learning experience in some ways to happen for the other committee member to then make mistakes, but then learn from those mistakes. I probably just kind of short circuited and just thought, well, I know what I need to do, so I'll just do it. So A, there'll be no mistakes, and B, it's the same as it was last year, so it'll be fine. And not inviting that challenge or inviting that change, I suppose, in some ways. That's probably the bigger one to learn. So yes, the playing focus was one, but probably the second one was around that idea of that real collaboration and teamwork.
So a couple of things of that last example. Did you get challenged by the treasurer or the kit secretary in that situation?
I mean, it probably helped we were best mates. So I suppose in some ways it was we were able to just, I suppose, kind of accept, well, this is how the way it works. But then actually, it's more a reflection on me. Did I give enough learning opportunities or enough opportunities to then think, well, this is a time when I did this more instead of a time I saw that this happened. But I think there's a delicate balance between complete delegation and then having no idea what's going on. So I think there's a balance to be had. It's an interesting one. I do think it's within a committee, it's making sure it's perfectly balanced in the sense of you've got people who are able to understand what needs to be done and then also understand, okay, how do we execute on that plan? Now, if we need to engage the rest of the club, we do. If we need to engage other areas of Team Leicester, we do. But fundamentally, we have a really set plan that can be challenged, that can be changed. But just so there's consistency and that there's that, I suppose, that framework that everyone's comfortable. Otherwise, things are always changing. People don't know what to kind of follow and what to get behind.
So on a few occasions, you've talked about leadership examples and different examples and how they're linked to employability. And I think you articulated earlier that when you're going for that employability role or that role, you should use examples. Now, where do you stand on giving both examples? Articulating both the good and the bad in that type of interview process. Are you one way inclined for not giving both type of examples, or do you feel it's beneficial that you give both type of examples to show your strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I think if you were to only give one type, strength or weakness, obviously you'd give your strength. But I think if you gave just your strength, they're going to think, oh, this person's perfect. Why do I need to why do I need to challenge them? And they know that it's an imperfect world. So there needs to be a balance between strength and weakness. I think the ability to reflect and be candid, I think, is really important because it almost shows levels of humility and also levels of reflection. I think if they did, they're probably the next Bill Gates. But if they did everything perfect, it almost begs the question as to, well, why am I interviewing you and you're not interviewing me? And so I think there needs to be that reflection and be able to say, look, this didn't always work out. But I think the important thing is for every weakness I don't really like the weakness is probably like every weakness that's given, you've got to give a spin to be a positive. So maybe not a weakness, more negative. So if you would say name a time when something failed, you could give the example, but then flip how you took that example and then made it a positive. So it might be that, I don't know, let's take my example on delegation. Could be that I realized that I hadn't delegated on something like a kit order, but then I realized that because of that, due to this discussion we then ensured that moving forward, there's a really good framework that wouldn't happen again. So I think it's really important to show that if something didn't happen as you wanted to, or didn't happen as it could and should have done, there's a reflection point and then a positive outcome. So it's always about kind of leaving on a positive note, but obviously shout up your strengths, talk about things you're good at, talk about things which you enjoy, but also things which you think, actually, I'm really keen to know more about this, and this is what I've done to do that. And I think that works in an employment sense, but I think especially in a committee application sense, talk about what you like, talk about what you've done. It might go back to when you were at school, talk about what you enjoyed at school. Have you done any societies or clubs, for example? All the stuff that you just want to know more about. I think it's to show what you can bring to it. Just because you might not have done that exact job doesn't mean that the skills required for that job is not something you've done before. I always joke that my first ever job was selling Christmas trees. So when I was like 13, I was the Christmas tree guy, and I used to make up so much stuff. I think I used to say that like new green was new growth and that kind of, just make all the kind of stuff up. But for me, that kind of taught me the ability to just be confident to speak to people. So
Yeah.
if it's name a time when you spoke to random people to convince them of an idea that you don't really believe in, oh great, well I sold Christmas trees that I made up how they worked. And it also becomes quite relatable examples, because anecdotally, if you tell a story, people can imagine that. Whereas if you're just kind of talking about things which are non-tangible, it's very difficult to think, how do I understand that, and how can people kind of feel what you kind of wanting them to feel.
That's really good, and I think you've gave our students, that are looking to do these roles, a great insight at the moment. I've just got a couple of more areas just to finish off, really.
Mm-hmm.
What do you believe are the non-negotiables? If you're looking to be a committee member, if you're looking to be successful, what are the non-negotiables? You may have mentioned these things earlier, but I'm going to use an example for me. I might pinch one from you, but humility is one.
Mm-hmm.
That for me, that would be a non-negotiable. You've got to be humble with it within your role at the end of the day. Do you feel there are any others?
Yeah, I think the humility one ties into one that I thought of, was the idea of like being willing to listen to others. Just because you've been elected to a role does not mean that you are the only person who knows what to do in that role. And feedback is a gift in some ways. So I think being able to listen to others and understand their point of view, you might not agree with it, and their point of view might actually be wrong, but it's the ability to think, okay, there's a reason that was given. And I think that humility and that ability to think, have I done the right thing, is a non-negotiable thing. I think another one linked to that is the idea there's no I in team. So it's not thinking, okay, I can go and just do it myself because either I've got the most experience, or that I know what to do best, or I think I know what to do best. It's the idea that we've got to be all collaborative together. And I think the final ones would just be ambitious. I think if you're in a committee that's not ambitious, that doesn't want to push itself and grow and ultimately try new things, I think you struggle, because if nothing changes for, let's say, 5 years in a row, people aren't going to want to be part of that team, that society. They'll look at other areas. I think it's really those three key things: is that the ability to listen to others, the no I in team, and then have ambition and be ambitious. Because there's plenty of other teams and plenty of other sports people can join. So why should people want to be part of your committee and your team and your club? I think that's something to be really conscious of.
Well, there's three very good examples, Sam. Thank you very much. And just finally, are there any recommendations you would have for today's students? In any area, is there anything that you recommend?
I think at the moment, with how things are, I think try and enjoy it. I think obviously it's going to be different, and touch wood, all being well, come September we'll be back to how I remember university, or at least some way towards it. But try and enjoy the time as we can. I think for those who are wanting to kind of connect with new people within their team, within their club, within their committee, I think making that effort will be reciprocated. There's nothing that's stopping a quick message, a quick call. I mean, video call. I mean, Steve and I were saying before, video call is great, because you actually can have that. Okay, it's different, but you can have that reaction with somebody and that interaction. But I think, yeah, just kind of jump 2 feet in, because I kind of say, what's the worst that can happen in some ways, and you'll make friends for life, and you'll make experiences you won't forget. So I think, yeah, definitely do that.
And I think, like with the jumping with 2 feet analogy, I think you've got to make mistakes to learn at the end of the day, and sometimes jumping with 2 feet, you'll learn a valuable lesson, which next time you will get right, and it will be successful at the end of the day.
And linked to that, I think the beauty is, having never done it before, you can almost go in 2 hands up. So, like, I don't know what I'm doing, so don't shoot. But I'm just asking questions and being inquisitive and wanting to learn. I think that inquisitiveness is almost the most important thing.
Yeah, that's great. Sam, I'd really like to thank you for your time today. To all our students out there listening to Sam's podcast, please do take things on board. If you've got any questions, please send them through to me, and I'll try and get them answered for you. Sam, if you're happy to do that, if there are any questions. If not, if some if people want to ask me questions, being part of Sport and Active Live team, that's fine. Coming up in the near future, we will have another alumni talking to us in a similar role that Sam's done today. But Sam, thank you once again, and I really appreciate your time.
No worries, Steve. Thank you.